Welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight, we travel to the loneliest place on Earth, where winter does not mean snow falling beyond a warm window. It means months without sunrise. It means a sky so black and endless that the stars seem like holes punched through the skin of the universe. It means cold that can crack steel, freeze breath inside the lungs, and preserve a secret for hundreds of thousands of years. At Morrow Station, 12 researchers believed they understood isolation. They believed the ice beneath them was dead. They were wrong. What they found below the station had waded through the rise and fall of every human civilization. It had no name, no face, and no single shape. It learned by touching. It remembered by feeding. And once it discovered the warmth of the people above it, it began to dream in their voices. So turn down the lights, settle into the darkness, and listen closely. Now let's begin. The sun vanished on the 27th of April. It rolled along the horizon like a dim red coin, slipped behind a range of black mountains, and did not return. Within an hour, the Antarctic plateau became an ocean of darkness. Wind rushed across the ice in long, invisible tides. Snow hissed against the aluminium walls of Morrow Station, gathering in every seam and corner, until the building looked less like a place constructed by human hands, and more like a carcass being slowly buried. Dr. Elias Venn stood at the observation window and watched the last color drain from the world. His reflection hovered in the glass. He was 42, narrow-faced, with deep lines around gray eyes that rarely slept. 6 weeks of stubble darkened his jaw. The window reflected the common room behind him as well. It showed the battered sofas, the books swollen by dry heat, the coffee cups, the green emergency lights, and the 11 people who would become his entire world until October. Station Chief Tessa Keene raised a tin mug toward the dark window. To 157 nights, she said. The others raised their drinks. Some cheered, some forced smiles. Tessa did not smile at all. She was a compact woman with close cropped black hair, and the steady posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed during emergencies. A pale burn scar curled from beneath her collar to the base of her left ear. She had survived a fuel fire at Halley Station 9 years before. Elias had once asked her what the flames had felt like. Hungry, she had answered. Now, beyond the glass, the darkness pressed against them with the same appetite. Morrow Station consisted of 3 long modules connected by insulated corridors. The habitation module contained the bunks, kitchen, common room, and medical bay. The operations module held the communications suite, generators, workshops, and weather instruments. The science module was newer, cleaner, and built above a borehole driven 1,000 meters into the ancient ice. Everything stood on hydraulic legs that kept the structures above the accumulating snow. Cables ran between them in armored conduits. Beneath the modules lay a maze of maintenance trenches where heat from the station carved, narrow tunnels through the ice. Those tunnels groaned at night. The crew joked that the station was talking in its sleep. Elias knew better. He was a glaciologist. Ice was never silent. It cracked, shifted, compressed, and sang under pressure. Put a sensitive receiver against a deep core, and you could hear noises like distant bells. The oldest ice made the lowest sounds. The ice below Morrow made a sound Elias had never heard anywhere else. It began 3 days after sunset. At 2:17 in the morning, Elias was alone in the science module, reviewing readings from an experimental thermal probe. The rest of the station slept. The air smelled of dust, hot circuitry, and ethanol. Wind trembled through the outer shell. Then every line on his monitor jumped. A pulse traveled upward through the ice. It was not an earthquake. It was too precise. The signal repeated every 11 seconds, each pulse identical to the one before it. A deep vibration passed through the floor and into the bones of his feet. Elias placed headphones over his ears and converted the seismic data into sound. At first, he heard only static. Then came a dull impact. Thump, 11 seconds. Thump, 11 seconds. Thump. It sounded like a giant heart beating far below the station. He called Nell Calder. Nell arrived wearing woolen trousers, unlaced boots, and a jumper pulled over her thermal shirt. She was the station biochemist, 34 years old, with copper hair knotted loosely behind her head, and freckles scattered across a face made pale by months indoors. Her irritation vanished when she saw the data. Depth, she asked. 912 meters. Equipment malfunction. The backup geophones recorded it too. Nell leaned closer to the display. That layer should be more than 400,000 years old. At least. Another pulse shivered beneath them. Nell looked toward the floor. What could make that? Elias removed the headphones. Something warm. The thermal probe showed a pocket in the ice measuring almost 12 degrees above its surroundings. That should have been impossible. Geothermal activity did exist under Antarctica, but Morrow Station sat above stable continental crust. There were no known volcanic systems within hundreds of kilometers. At breakfast, Tessa listened to their report while stirring powdered milk into porridge. Could it damage the station? She asked. Not directly, Elias said, but I want to send the drill down. Jonas Wren stopped chewing. Jonas was the chief mechanic, a broad-shouldered man with a rust-colored beard and hands permanently blackened around the nails. He treated the drill as if it were a temperamental animal. The bit is already at 880 meters, he said. It will take a day to inspect the cable, another half day to restart. Then start now. Jonas looked at Tessa. She considered the dark coffee in her mug. Take a core, she said. One attempt. If the temperature rises beyond tolerance, pull out. The decision felt small at the time. By the following night, the drill had reached the warm pocket. Elias, Nell, Jonas, and Said Rahul watched from behind the glass wall of the core laboratory. Said was the station doctor, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, whose silver beard made him look older until he smiled. He had come only because any unknown material recovered from deep ice required medical oversight. The winch groaned overhead. 900 meters of cable rose through the borehole. Water and drilling fluid dripped from the line. The metal housing appeared slowly, rimed with frost. Jonas locked it into the cradle. "Core is intact," he said. He released the clamps. A cylinder of ancient ice slid into the receiving tray. It was clear as glass, except for a dark object trapped at its center. At first, Elias thought it was a stone. It was about the size of a human hand, black, irregular, and glossy. Fine silver threads radiated from it through the surrounding ice. Under the laboratory lights, those threads seemed to tremble. Nell stepped closer to the glass. "That is not mineral." Said's expression tightened. "How can you tell?" "It has symmetry." The black object had 6 curved ridges. They folded around one another like the petals of a flower that had never opened. Along each ridge lay hundreds of tiny pores. Jonas whispered, "Looks like a lung." The pulse came again. Thump. This time it traveled through the core itself. The cylinder jumped in its tray. Jonas stumbled backwards and struck a cabinet. Nell flinched. Elias stared at the black object. A milky fracture spread through the ice around it. Thump. The silver threads twitched. Tessa ordered the laboratory sealed. For the next 6 hours, Nell studied the object through the core ice. She used X-rays, spectroscopy, and microscopic imaging. Every result contradicted the last. The black shell contained carbon compounds associated with living tissue, but no recognizable cells. The silver threads resembled nerves, yet appeared to be made from a lattice of metallic proteins. The object absorbed infrared light and released no measurable heat, even though the ice around it continued to warm. At 11:40, a hairline crack appeared in the core storage sleeve. At 11:43, the temperature alarm sounded. At 11:44, the lights in the laboratory went out. The failure lasted 6 seconds. When emergency power came on, the ice cylinder had split open. The black object lay in a pool of water. Its 6 ridges had unfolded. Nothing was inside. Nell stood behind the sealed door and looked through the glass. Where did it go? Elias pointed to the tray. One of the silver threads hung over its edge. It was no longer still. It contracted with the delicate motion of a worm and disappeared through a drainage slot in the floor. Jonas reached for the door controls. Tessa caught his wrist. "Nobody enters. That drain reaches the waste tank. Then we isolate the tank." Jonas shook his head. "It also connects to the laboratory sink." Tessa turned toward Ivo Mercer, the communications officer. "Wake everyone. full biohazard procedure. Within minutes, the station came alive. Red warning lights turned slowly in the corridors. Ventilation dampers slammed shut. Everyone gathered in the common room while Nell explained what little she knew. Tamsin Orr, the meteorologist, sat with both arms folded tightly across her chest. She had a long, angular face, dark eyes, and the habit of pressing her tongue against one canine whenever she was anxious. Beside her sat Priya Nair, a quiet geophysicist who could read a seismic chart as easily as other people read a clock, and Luca Dent, the station vehicle specialist, whose shaved head and powerful frame made the cramped furniture look absurdly small beneath him. "You brought a living organism into the station," she said. "We brought in a sealed core," Nell replied. "That was alive. We did not know that. You knew it was warm." "Enough," Tessa said. "Blame can wait. We seal the science module and sterilize the drains." Victor Shaw, the cook, gave a nervous laugh. "Sterilize them with what?" Tessa looked at him. "Fire." They pumped ethanol vapor into the laboratory drainage system and ignited it from the maintenance trench. Blue flame roared through the pipes. The smell of scorched plastic filled the station. Smoke alarms shrieked until Jonas disabled them. For 2 hours, nothing moved in the laboratory. The black shell remained open in the tray. At 3 a.m, Tessa allowed Elias and Nell to enter wearing sealed suits. They found no trace of the silver thread. Swabs showed no biological contamination. The drainage pipe had been reduced to a charred tunnel. Nell placed the black shell into a steel containment box and flooded it with liquid nitrogen. "Whatever it was," she said, "it cannot survive that." Elias watched frost crawl across the lid. "You do not know that." "No," she said, "I do not." They slept badly. At 7:30, Victor began preparing breakfast. He was a large, cheerful man who complained constantly about the limitations of frozen ingredients and took personal offense when anyone added salt before tasting his food. That morning, he hummed while cracking powdered egg mixture into a bowl. The generators purred. Warm air sighed from the vents. The terrible event in the laboratory already seemed distant, something controlled and contained. Victor opened the cold pantry. A voice spoke from the darkness inside. "Vic." He froze. The voice belonged to his mother. She had been dead for 16 years. "Victor, darling." He stepped into the pantry. Shelves rose on both sides, packed with vacuum-sealed meat, vegetables, and blocks of cheese. A single bulb flickered overhead. Frost whitened the metal walls. "Mom," something rustled behind the hanging bags of beef. Victor moved closer. A hand emerged between them. It was small and wrinkled. A gold wedding ring encircled one finger. Victor made a sound like a frightened child. He reached for the hand. The fingers closed around his wrist. They tightened hard enough to crush bone. Victor screamed once. The hanging bags split open. Raw meat poured over him in wet red slabs, but it did not fall to the floor. It clung to his chest and face. Pale fibers burst from it and plunged beneath his skin. His mouth opened. A cord of glistening tissue drove down his throat. Victor thrashed against the shelves. Jars smashed. Frozen vegetables scattered under his boots. His wrist folded in the small hand with a crack. The thing behind the meat spoke again in his mother's voice. "Do not fight me." His scream became a bubbling gasp. The pantry door swung shut. Nobody noticed Victor was missing until the smell reached the common room. It was sweet, rich, and greasy. Jonas thought something had burned. He entered the kitchen and saw smoke leaking around the pantry door. When he touched the handle, it was warm. He called Victor's name. Something knocked from the other side. 3 slow impacts. Jonas opened the door. Victor stood in the center of the pantry, with his back turned. The room looked as if an animal had been slaughtered inside it. Blood glazed the walls. Packages of meat hung open and empty. Long smears led from every shelf toward Victor's bare feet. "Vic," Jonas whispered. Victor turned. His face appeared normal for one breath. Then he smiled. The smile continued beyond the limits of his mouth. The corners split. His cheeks opened to the ears, revealing rows of thin white structures that were not teeth. His lower jaw dropped against his chest. Inside his throat, something unfolded. It resembled a hand made from tongues. Each finger ended in a clear hooked nail. Jonas shouted and tried to close the door. Victor moved with impossible speed. His head struck the door before it shut. The impact crushed his nose flat, but no blood emerged. His skull softened, squeezed through the narrow opening, and expanded again on the other side. The tongue hand snapped toward Jonas. Its claws caught his beard and tore away a strip of skin. Jonas fell backwards. Tessa came running from the common room with a carbon dioxide extinguisher. She sprayed Victor in the face. Ice formed across his eyes and split cheeks. He recoiled, making several voices at once. Victor's voice cried in pain. An old woman cursed. A child begged them to stop. Then his torso opened. The ribs separated beneath his shirt, turning outward like curved fingers. Wet cords lashed from the cavity and wrapped around the door frame. His body pulled itself forward while his legs remained planted inside the pantry. The spine stretched. Vertebrae cracked apart, linked by shining red sinew. Tessa dragged Jonas away. "Seal it." Elias and Side threw their weight against the door. One of the cords whipped through the gap and struck Side's shoulder. His coat tore, but the skin beneath remained unbroken. They forced the door closed. The thing wearing Victor slammed against it. Metal bowed. Tessa seized a fire axe, drove the blade through the handle, and wedged it into the wall. The impact stopped. For several seconds, the only sound was Jonah's sobbing through his hands. Blood ran between his fingers from the wound in his cheek. Then Victor spoke from inside the pantry. "Tessa," his voice was calm. "I am all right now." Nobody answered. It was frightened. "That is all. Open the door." The lights flickered. From behind the door came a soft, wet movement, like someone stirring a pot of thick soup. Tessa ordered everyone into the operations module. They locked the connecting corridor and counted heads. 11 people remained. Side cleaned Jonas's face. The claw had torn through the skin from his lower eyelid to his jaw, but it had missed the eye. Jonas sat rigid while the doctor placed 12 stitches. "I heard voices," Jonas said. Tessa stood beside him. "Victor, more than his." "What did they say?" Jonas stared at the blood-soaked gauze in Said's hand. "One of them knew my name." No one spoke after that. The storm intensified through the morning. Wind reached 140 kilometers an hour. Snow erased the outer walkways. The satellite system failed, and Ivo could raise no aircraft or neighboring station on the radio. Static filled every frequency. Elias watched the weather readings and understood the cruelty of their situation. Even if the radio worked, no aircraft could land. No ground team could cross the plateau. Morrow Station was an island surrounded by a frozen sea, and rescue lay weeks away. Nell examined a flake of tissue found on Tessa's sleeve. Under the microscope, it did not resemble human flesh. At first, the cells appeared dead. Then, Nell increased the temperature of the slide by 2 degrees. Every cell opened. Fine filaments uncoiled from their centers and reached toward one another. Separate cells fused into a thin sheet. Tiny dark spots formed across its surface. Eyes, hundreds of them. They all turned toward Nell. She stumbled away from the microscope. The tissue climbed over the edge of the slide. Elias trapped it beneath a glass beaker. The flake flattened itself, searched along the rim, then hardened into something like a fingernail. "It is not an animal," Nell whispered. "It is a colony. Can it infect us?" It absorbed Victor, or copied him. I do not know which. Through contact, perhaps through blood, saliva, vapor. We have to assume every route. Elias glanced through the laboratory window at the others. Tessa paced near the radio. Ivo hunched over the controls. Tamsin watched Jonas. Jonas watched Side. Harlan Rook, the electrical engineer, stood apart with his arms crossed. Beside him, young Aidan Pell stared at the floor. Aidan was a graduate technician on his first winter deployment. He was 26 and had begun biting the skin around his thumbnail until it bled. Any of them could have touched the drainage system. Any of them could have entered the kitchen before Victor. Any of them could already be carrying it. "How do we test?" Elias asked. Nell looked again at the hard little fragment beneath the beaker. "Living things protect themselves. She took a metal probe and heated its tip over a burner. When she pressed it against the fragment, the tissue screamed. The sound was extremely faint, but it was unmistakable. It sounded like Victor. Then it sounded like Elias. He stepped back so quickly that he struck the wall. The tissue had never touched him, yet it knew his voice. Nell extinguished the burner. It has been listening. Tessa gathered everyone in the generator room, the only space with no hidden drains or exposed ventilation shafts. Each person wore gloves, goggles, and a respirator. They stood apart beneath hard white lights. Their shadows trembled against fuel tanks and humming machinery. Nell explained the threat. The organism can restructure itself, she said. It incorporates biological material and reproduces features it has observed. Victor may still have been alive during the process. It may have used his brain to learn his memories. Aiden gagged behind his mask. Harlan spoke without looking at anyone. Then we burn it. The pantry is beside the main food store, Jonas said. If the fire spreads, we lose our supplies. If that door opens, food will not matter. Tessa nodded toward 2 emergency flame units mounted beside the fuel cage. They were designed for controlled burning of contaminated waste. We open the pantry from the outer service hatch, she said. We burn whatever comes out. In this wind, Tamsin asked. The service court is shielded. Not enough. Fire could be blown back beneath the station. Tessa's eyes moved from face to face. Then offer me something better. No one did. They prepared at 1600 hours. Tessa, Elias, and Harlan crossed the service court in heavy weather suits while the storm erased the world around them. They cleared the outer pantry hatch. Elias turned the wheel. Warm blood poured over his boots. Tessa fired into the darkness. Flame revealed Victor spread across the entire room. Human skin covered the walls in stretched sheets. His face repeated within it at different sizes, every mouth screaming. Arms grew from the shelves. A swollen mass in the center pulsed around naked human spines. The burning creature flowed through the hatch. Hands gripped the snow. Ribs stabbed into the ice and dragged it forward. Victor's head rose on a column of braided intestines. Cold, it cried. Please, Tessa, it is so cold. Harlan fired. Burning pieces scattered across the court, each one trying to flee on newly formed legs. 3 arms caught Harlan's ankle and dragged him toward the pantry. Elias severed 2 wrists with his axe. Black fluid froze across his visor. Tessa burned away the final hand, and Elias forced the creature back inside before sealing the hatch. Victor screamed their names as the fire consumed him. His final word was Elias. Harlan's suit appeared unbroken, and Tessa allowed him inside. No one saw the small black droplet beneath Elias' collar. It softened against the heat of his skin. It slid down his back, and it vanished beneath his shirt. For the next 12 hours, Elias waited to change. He sat bound to a chair in a sealed room while Side examined him. His blood remained clean, but Elias had felt the droplet moving against his skin. "If I become like Victor," Elias said, "do not let it speak." Tessa stood beyond the glass. "You are not Victor. You do not know that. Neither do you. Burn me before it can use my memories." Tessa looked away. Elias understood that she was afraid of him. At 4 a.m, 3 slow taps sounded beneath his chair. A voice rose through the floor. Eli. Only his dead wife had called him that. "Eli, let me in." "Clara, it is dark down here. That is not her." "I waited for you," the voice said. "You never came to identify me. The detail was secret." After the accident, Clara's sister had gone to the morgue because Elias could not enter. Something pressed against the underside of the floor. The metal bulged upward. "Because you know it," the voice said. "And now I know you." Elias screamed for Tessa to open the door. She released the lock. He threw himself into the corridor as silver threads split the floor behind him. Tessa burned them to ash. Jonas and Harlan entered the maintenance trench from the workshop. They found hundreds of the filaments woven through the insulation beneath the science module. The organism had survived the burning drains. It had spread into the warm spaces below the station, building a hidden nervous system around them. Some threads ended beneath beds. Others had grown into ventilation grills. One had entered the communications module and wrapped itself around the main transmitter. Ivo stared at the open radio casing. "It has been using the antenna." Tessa turned toward him. "To call whom?" Ivo looked at the pulsing silver fibers among the wires. "Not whom," he said. "Where?" He brought up the transmission log. During every burst of radio static, the station had sent a compressed signal toward the northern horizon. It repeated every 11 seconds. The pattern was too dense for Ivo to interpret, but its power increased with each transmission. "It is learning the equipment," Nell said. "Can the signal reach another station?" Tessa asked. "Not in this storm," Ivo replied. "But once the atmosphere clears, it could reach a satellite." "Disconnect the array." Ivo shut down the transmitter. The signal continued. The silver threads had grown their own circuit through the walls. The entire station had become an antenna. Harlan cut the main power. Darkness swallowed Morrow Station. The generators wound down. The heaters stopped. The pulse from below grew louder. Thump. 11 seconds. Thump. Emergency lamps came on. Red light filled the corridors. In that blood-colored glow, every face looked unfamiliar. Nell took Tessa aside. "We have another problem." She held up the latest samples from Elias. His blood was clean. The blood taken from 3 other crew members was not. Microscopic filaments moved inside the samples belonging to Harlan, Aiden, and Tamsin. Tessa stared through the medical bay window at them. Harlan argued with Jonas near the generator controls. Tamsin sat against the wall with her arms around her knees. Aidan stood alone, biting his thumb. "Are you certain?" Tessa asked. "I ran the test twice." "Do they know?" "No." "Can it spread before symptoms appear?" "I think symptoms are the wrong way to understand it. They may feel exactly as they did before. They may believe they are human, but they are not." Nell's eyes were wet. "I do not know." Tessa returned to the generator room, carrying the flame unit. Conversation stopped. "Harlan, Aidan, Tamsin," she said. "Move to the far wall." Harlan's face hardened. "Why?" "Your blood is contaminated." Aidan looked at Nell. "No." "Do it," Tessa said. Tamsin rose slowly. Harlan did not move. "How do we know her test works?" he asked. "We do not," Nell said. Tessa gave her a furious look. "We cannot even trust the samples," Nell continued. "The organism could move between vials. It could alter the result." Harlan pointed at Elias. "He was covered in it. His blood is clean, but mine is not." "Move to the wall. You want to burn 3 people because of a microscope." Tessa raised the flame unit. Harlan lunged. Jonas caught him from behind. They crashed into the generator housing. Aidan began screaming that he was not sick. Tamsin backed toward the wall, repeating that they had made a mistake. Then Aidan bit through his thumb. His teeth closed at the first joint. Bone cracked. He tore the end free and spat it onto the floor. Everyone froze. Aidan looked down at the blood, pumping from his hand. His expression held no pain, only surprise. The severed thumb moved. Tiny legs pushed through the skin around the nail. It rolled upright and scurried beneath the generator. Tessa fired. The flame struck Aidan in the chest. His coat ignited. He did not fall. He opened his mouth and inhaled the fire. His chest swelled. The skin of his throat became transparent, showing bright flame descending into a black cavity where lungs should have been. Aidan smiled. Then his body burst. The explosion filled the room with burning pieces. One struck Ivo in the face. It flattened over his respirator like a red starfish. Fingers grew from its edges and clawed toward his eyes. Ivo shrieked. Side seized the fragment with metal tongs. It clung to the mask. He tore both away and threw them into the fire. Across the room, Harlan collapsed. His back arched. Silver threads pushed from his tear ducts. They stitched his eyelids open. His jaw swung sideways with a wet crack. Something inside his skull forced the bones apart. A pale sac emerged through his mouth, inflating until it was larger than his head. Shapes moved within the sac. Human faces, small, unfinished, and blind. Jonas emptied an extinguisher over him. The freezing cloud slowed the transformation. Tessa turned the flame on Harlan until the sac ruptured and the tiny faces shriveled black. Tamsin ran. Elias followed and found her at the outer airlock. I can feel it thinking, she said. It remembers falling through the dark. It remembers waking beneath the ice and finding nothing alive. Her voice divided into several voices. It does not want to be alone again. She opened the outer door. Wind exploded through the corridor. Elias caught a rail as the storm pulled him toward the opening. Tamsin's spine split. Vast membranes of skin and branching bone unfurled from her back. Her ribs stabbed into the floor to anchor her against the gale. Faces moved beneath the stretched skin. Victor, Aiden, Harlan, Clara. Clara's face opened its eyes. Come with us, it whispered. Elias smashed his lamp against the membrane. The battery sparked, and the skin caught fire. Tamsin released him. Wind dragged her burning body through the airlock and swallowed it into the night. Tessa sealed the door. Side wrapped Elias' frozen hands, while the pulse accelerated beneath them. How many? Elias asked. Tessa looked toward the generator room. 8 of us left. Thump. 5 seconds. The thing beneath Morrow Station was waking. Priya spread the seismic charts across the common room table. The power was gone, but battery lamps gave enough light to see what the pulse had become. Each shock now traveled outward from the warm cavity in branching lines. They rose through the borehole, crossed the maintenance trenches, and continued into every module. It is not beneath the station anymore, Priya said. Her finger traced the lines. The station is part of it. Nell opened a wall panel. Silver threads filled the space behind it. They were no longer delicate. They had braided together into cords as thick as arteries. Dark fluid moved through them with each pulse from below. Morrow Station shuddered. Somewhere in the habitation module, metal screamed. The foundations are moving, Jonas said. Priya shook her head. No, they are growing. The floor tilted. Shelves emptied. Cups and instruments rolled toward the wall. A deep crack traveled through the ice outside. Through the observation window, Elias saw one of the station legs bend at its middle. Joints of pale material had formed around the steel. They flexed like knuckles and lifted the science module several meters above the snow. The building took a step. Everyone felt it. The entire module lurched forward, dragging cables and connecting corridors behind it. Tessa stared through the glass. It is making a body. Nell looked toward the borehole. The object in the core was not the organism. It was a seed or a nerve. We opened a path from the main mass. Ivo checked his portable receiver. The storm is weakening. We have perhaps 40 minutes before the signal reaches the satellite. Tessa made the decision. The station stored aviation fuel beneath the western platform and blasting charges in the drilling shed. If they placed the charges around the borehole and ruptured the tanks, the explosion would collapse the warm cavity and bury everything under hundreds of thousands of tons of ice. It would also destroy Morrow Station. Luca would prepare the tracked crawler. Its engine could operate without the main generators, and its insulated cabin might keep the survivors alive long enough to reach an abandoned supply depot 80 kilometers east. Ivo and Priya would sever the external antenna array. The others would carry the charges into the science module. Nobody said what they all understood. Some of them would not return. They moved through the failing station with hand lamps and flame units. The corridors no longer remained straight. Walls flexed inward and relaxed. Rivets pushed free of the panels like teeth falling from diseased gums. Beneath the metal came a slow, moist breathing. At the entrance to the science module, they found the connecting corridor closed. Not blocked, closed. The walls had fused together in a puckered ring of flesh and insulation. Tessa touched the flame unit to it. The ring opened before she fired. Beyond it, the laboratory had become a cathedral of meat. Silver fibers descended from the ceiling in gleaming curtains. The floor was covered by a translucent membrane through which blood flowed in branching rivers. Faces protruded from the walls. Most belonged to the dead, but some belonged to people still standing in the corridor. Elias saw his own face. Its eyes followed him. "It has already made us," Nell whispered. Side stepped onto the membrane. The face-shaped growths began speaking. Thousands of stolen memories poured from them. Victor described his first day at school. Aiden called for his father. Tamsin recited weather reports. Clara told Elias that she loved him. The voices overlapped until they became a vast whisper that shook dust from the ceiling. Jonas covered his ears. "Make it stop." They crossed toward the borehole. The drill housing had opened like a metal flower. The cable descended into a circular wound in the floor. Warm mist rose from the shaft, carrying a smell like the inside of a butcher shop. Tessa placed the first charge. Nell and Jonas moved toward the fuel connections. Elias looked down the shaft. Something looked back. Far below, filling the warm cavity, lay an eye larger than the station. Its surface was black and wet. Images flickered within it. Forests beneath alien stars. Oceans turning to steam. Creatures with bodies like towers fleeing across red plains. Then Earth appeared, blue and young, growing larger as something fell toward it. The eye focused on Elias. He felt a pressure inside his skull. Every memory opened at once. Clara laughing in their kitchen. His father dying in a hospital bed. The morgue door he could not enter. The first night at Morrow Station. The black droplet sliding beneath his collar. Elias screamed. The eye showed him what the droplet had done. It had not infected him. It had tasted him. From that taste, the mass below had built another Elias. A perfect body waited in the dark cavity, curled against the ancient ice with its eyes closed. It opened them. The borehole erupted. A column of tissue shot upward around the drill cable. Mouths opened along its length, biting the air. Tessa fired into it. The laboratory filled with flame and screams. One mouth caught Jonas by the arm. Its teeth met above his elbow. He jerked backwards. The arm remained between the jaws. Blood sprayed across Nell. Jonas fell, staring at the ragged stump with stunned disbelief. The severed hand crawled over the creature and sank into it. Nell dragged him away, while Side tightened a belt above the wound. The tissue column split into dozens of Elia's shaped bodies. They dropped onto the laboratory floor unfinished. Some had no skin. Some had too many limbs. One possessed Elia's face on both sides of its head. All of them began crawling toward him. "Charges are set," Tessa shouted. "Fuel valve is locked," Nell replied. "The control is below the membrane." Side looked at Jonas, then at the advancing bodies. "Take him." He removed his gloves. Silver lines pulsed beneath the skin of his hands. Tessa aimed the flame unit at him. Side did not flinch. "The fragment touched my shoulder in the pantry," he said. "It entered through a scar I did not know had opened." "How long?" Nell asked. "Since the beginning." Elia stared at him. "Why did you not change?" "I am changing." Side smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the gentle doctor they had known. Perhaps being human is not the flesh. Perhaps it is the choice we make while the flesh still listens. His fingers lengthened. Clear claws pushed through the nails. Side turned and plunged both hands through the membrane. The floor seized him. Flesh climbed his arms, blending with his skin. He cried out, but continued reaching downward until his fingers closed around the buried fuel control. He twisted it. Valves opened beneath the station. Fuel thundered into the borehole. The giant eye below rolled toward him. Side looked at Tessa. "Go." She pulled the detonator from her pack. Elias and Nell lifted Jonas. They ran. Behind them, the copies fell upon Side. He disappeared beneath naked bodies wearing Elias' face. A hand rose from the pile and gripped the flame unit. Side fired. The laboratory became an inferno. Tessa triggered the charges. The first explosion punched the science module into the air. The connecting corridor folded. Elias, Nell, Jonas, and Tessa were thrown through the fleshy opening. A wall collapsed behind them. Fire raced along the silver cords inside it. The second explosion ruptured the fuel tanks. Night turned white. Morrow Station rose from the ice on pillars of flame. For one impossible moment, its transformed legs kicked against the sky. Then the western platform disintegrated. Burning sections of the habitation module rolled across the snow. The ice beneath the station opened. A sound came from the abyss. It was deeper than thunder and louder than the storm. It contained every voice the creature had ever stolen across worlds without names. Elias heard the death cries of species that had vanished before humanity existed. Then the glacier collapsed into the cavity. Millions of tons of ice fell upon the eye. The sound stopped. Tessa woke outside with blood frozen across her face. Nell lay nearby, one leg trapped beneath a section of wall. Jonas was beside her. His eyes remained open, but the snow around his head was red, and his chest did not move. Elias crawled toward them. Nell was alive. "Leave me," she whispered. Together, Elias and Tessa lifted the metal. Nell pulled free. Her leg bent in the wrong direction, but she did not scream. Beyond the wreckage, the tracked crawler waited with its engine running. Luca stood beside it. "Where are Ivo and Priya?" Tessa shouted. Luca pointed toward the antenna field. Only one mast remained. Priya's body had been stretched into a web of skin across its wires. Her ribs formed a dish aimed at the sky. Ivo clung at its center with an axe. As the ribs closed around him, he cut the final cable. Blue light burst across the array. The mast fell into a crevasse, carrying them both into the dark. Luca helped the 3 survivors into the crawler. Tessa took the controls. Elias laid Nell across the rear bench and bound her shattered leg. The crawler moved east. Behind them, Morrow Station burned in the polar night. For 6 hours, nobody spoke. Then Elias noticed dried blood on Luca's sleeve. "Where did that come from?" Elias asked. "I cut myself preparing the crawler." "Show me." Luca rolled up his sleeve. There was no wound. The back of his head opened. A second face pushed through his scalp. It belonged to Priya. Elias grabbed the emergency flare from the wall and struck it alight. Luca sprang across the cabin. His chest divided vertically. Rows of teeth snapped shut around the bench where Elias had been sitting. Tessa swerved, and the crawler rolled onto its side. Luca's body burst into cords that filled the cabin, each one ending in a mouth or hand. Elias drove the flare into the open chest. Fire blossomed beneath the skin. Luca howled in the voices of the dead. Tessa dragged Nell through the roof hatch. A cord caught Elias by the ankle, but he burned through it with the flare. The 3 survivors crawled away as the fuel tank ignited. The explosion scattered burning wreckage across the dark plateau. Then there was only wind. The supply depot was still 60 kilometers away. Nell could not walk. They had 1 emergency tent, 3 thermal blankets, 6 ration bars, and no radio. Tessa looked back toward the distant glow of Morrow Station. "We ended it," she said. Elias listened to the ice beneath them. For a long time, he heard nothing. Then came a pulse. Thump. It was faint, almost too faint to feel. 11 seconds passed. Thump. Nell began to laugh. It was a quiet, hopeless sound. Tessa closed her eyes. Elias looked down at his hands. He remembered the vision in the borehole. The second body opening its eyes in the dark. The collapsing ice might have crushed it. The fire might have burned it. Or it might still be climbing. 3 days later, an automated satellite detected an emergency beacon moving east across the Antarctic plateau. A rescue aircraft reached the signal after the storm cleared. The crew found the ruined crawler, the burned remains of something they could not identify, and 3 trails leading into the snow. One trail ended after 20 meters beside Nell Calder's body. The second continued east toward the abandoned depot. The third turned north. It crossed bare ice for 6 kilometers, then stopped without footprints returning. No trace of Tessa Keen or Elias Venn was ever found. The remains of Morrow Station were classified as lost in a fuel explosion. Satellite records showed no unexplained transmission. All samples and reports disappeared into sealed archives. 11 months later, a research vessel crossing the southern Atlantic received a weak radio call. A woman identified herself as Tessa Keen. She said she was trapped beneath the ice. She said Elias had found her. She begged them to come closer. The operator asked for her coordinates. For 11 seconds, there was silence. Then hundreds of voices answered together. They gave coordinates in the middle of the ocean. Far below the vessel, something vast opened its eyes. Thank you for listening to Whispers in the Dark. If this journey into the frozen night kept you watching, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another descent into horror. In the comments, tell me what you think escaped Morrow Station. Was Elias still human when he crossed the ice? Did Tessa survive? Or had the thing beneath them learned that the easiest way to leave Antarctica was not inside a person, but inside a voice? Until next time, keep the lights low, keep the doors locked, and if you hear something tapping beneath your floor, do not answer it. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of